Hi everyone, in today's video I'd like to analyze an amazing attacking game by former world champion Robert James Fischer, also known as Bobby Fischer. But before that, let me give you some background about the tournament. This was the 1963-64 US Championship, and in this tournament Fischer literally won all of his games. So he scored 11 points out of 11 and he ended up first, way ahead of the runner-up, who was Larry Evans. He was 3.5 points ahead. And the game that we're going to analyze is his win against American Grandmaster Robert Byrne, and this game won the Brilliancy Prize. So the Brilliancy Prize on a tournament on which you win all of your games will normally be quite a good game. And this game is probably the closest game that I've seen to a perfect game played by a human. So let's get started with the game. Here, Byrne started with the move d4, and after knight to f6, c4, here Fischer played the move g6, planning to fin to the bishop. And here the most common way to continue is to go knight to c3, planning to occupy the center straight away. Here black can decide to go for either a Grunfeld, fighting for the center straight away, or allowing black to occupy the center by going d6, which will lead the game into a king's Indian defense. But here Byrne played the move g3, which is definitely not a bad move, but I think that this game illustrates two very important points. One of them, as we'll see, is going to be the importance of piece activity, and another one is not to play too solidly against stronger opponents, because they will simply outplay you. So here going for a sharp fight was probably a better option, because playing solidly against Fischer, who had a super strong tactical and position understanding, would not put any pressure on him. So here Fischer played the move g6, bishop to g7 is definitely an option, but here Fischer wants to fight for the center straight away and plan to recapture with the c-pawn. So here after bishop to g2, d5, pawn takes and pawn takes. Here white played knight to c3. This position is very solid. Black doesn't have a lot of problems in this line. And after bishop to g7, again Byrne played a very solid move, which is the move e3. So here the move knight to f3, and then planning to go knight to e5 is the most common way for white to try to fight for an advantage. Because after e3, black simply castles. As we'll see, we're going to get a very symmetrical position. Here white developed the knight to e2. This was one of the ideas of the move e3. And after knight to c6, white castles, b6, and after b3, bishop to a6 and bishop to a3. We get a very symmetrical position. We can see a slight difference that I would even argue that might be on black's favor, which is that the knight on f6 is a bit more active than the knight on e2. This is definitely not enough for black to claim an advantage, but in this position, white is, in my view, definitely not trying to fight for an advantage. Black is very comfortable here. Here the pawn on e7 is pinned, that's why Fischer played the move rook to e8. And as I told you, in this game, Fischer played a perfect game or very close to a perfect game. And one example is that in this position here, Byrne played the move queen to d2. And seeing what happened in the game, it was probably better to play the move queen to c2, anticipating black's idea of going e5. As we see, queen to c2 is something that Byrne played a few moves later. But queen to d2 looks like a very solid move. And here black plays something like e6. Again, we get a symmetrical pawn structure. Very dull play, but here Fischer, seeing how Byrne played, already after 12 moves, started playing actively, fighting for an advantage. And here comes the move e5, occupying the center. Now, if white doesn't take on e5, then e4 might come. Black simply gets extra space on the king side for free. h5 and h4 might follow up later if black plays e4. That's why taking on e5 makes a lot of sense. And after knight takes, here we see how Fischer gets a very strong knight on e5, that might land on d3, but on the other hand, black gets this isolated pawn on d5, which very often can become a target, and also a potential square on d4 for the knight. But in this particular position, white is in no time to either go to d4 because the knight on e2 is pinned, and white is also not in time to capture the pawn on d5, because after knight takes and knight takes, the queen is going to be overloaded with the protection on the knight on e2. For example, after bishop takes, here black even has this very nice tactic combining a fork and a pin, because after knight to f3, we get this fork and this bishop on d5 is pinned, so after bishop takes, black simply captures on d2. Or if white takes on d5 with a queen, after the trade, bishop takes, attacks the rook, so here black ends up being a piece up. So white already has to be careful in this position, amazingly, after just 13 moves. And here white's best try was a very hard move to play for a human, which is to go rook a to d1. Just leaving this knight on e2 pinned, And the idea is to have this rook on f1 overprotecting the pawn on f2. So very hard to play for a human, but this would have held white's position together. But it is very hard to blame Byrne for playing the move rook a to d1, just a very natural move, breaking the pin, bringing the rook to the d file. And here Fischer followed up with knight to d3, and here black has ideas to continue with the move knight to e4. So this position is already, at the very least, slightly better for black. Here white should have tried something like knight to f4, again trying to hold the position, but here comes the decisive mistake. Byrne played the move queen to c2, a natural move because white has the idea to take on d3, but on the other hand this is quite slow because white had already moved the queen to d2, and black has very active pieces. So now the fireworks start. Here Fischer captured the pawn on f2, and after king takes, knight to g4, we get a fork. Black will get 2 pawns for the knight, and white's king is already exposed. And after king to g1, knight takes, we get this fork, but as we'll see, this is not the main idea in this position. White played the move queen to d2, and in this position, Byrne probably expected the move knight takes d1, the materialistic approach. And in this position, we see how things change, because now black is materially doing fine, because black has a rook and 2 pawns for 2 knights, but we see how now white managed to activate his pieces. So here white might continue with knight to d4, for example after rook to c8, knight to d4, now white's pieces start to consolidate, there's pressure on d5 as well, so this position is definitely not clear. But Fischer's idea was to continue with the attack against white's king. That's why here Fischer captured this very strong bishop on g2, and after king takes, again, all this had to be seen in advance. The follow-up is the move d4. Fischer doesn't care about material, he just wants to attack on the light squares. Here after knight takes, bishop to g2, this king doesn't have good squares to go. If the king goes to h3, then after queen to d7, this king is definitely not going to be well placed. And let's analyze other alternatives. King to f1 was played in the game, but after king to f2, black has a similar idea to the game. Queen to d7, planning to go queen to h3, just attacking white's king. We see how the rook on e8 is also very annoying, just cutting the king. And the move king to g1 might look like a logical move from a general point of view because we want to get away from the light squares, but here white has a very instructive tactic. After bishop takes and queen takes, black is giving this very strong bishop on g7, but there's a tactical reason. After rook to e1, we have a very typical deflection, giving a check. If rook takes, then black will simply capture the queen on d4, and after the king moves, black can trade queens and then capture the rook on a1, ending up an exchange and a pawn up. That's why Byrne tried king to f1, and in this position, Fischer played the move queen to d7. The main idea is to attack on the light squares, and we can see how powerful these two bishops are. Black only has 1 pawn for a minor piece, but the piece activity that black has is just way too much to handle. In this position, surprisingly Byrne resigned, but there's no good defense against queen to h3. One very nice line that Fischer gave after the game was queen to f2, and after queen to h3 and king to g1, black has these two very beautiful consecutive sacrifices. First go rook to e1, white has to capture with the rook. If white captures with the queen, queen to g2 is a checkmate. And after rook takes, bishop takes, and now again this queen is overloaded. There's no way to stop the move queen to g2, even a checkmate, unless white sacrifices a queen, for example with a move like knight to e4. So for example here after queen takes, queen to g2 is a checkmate. So this was literally a perfect game played by Bobby Fischer, or very close to perfection. I hope that you enjoyed this game. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. This will help me a lot. If you want to get a full training plan to improve at chess, do check my free course in the description. In any case, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.